Guam is considered one of the world's most beautiful islands, a vacationer's paradise for sure.
As expected, more rhetoric from North Korea a short time ago. The state-run news agency KCNA issuing a statement saying that North Korea's military is, quote, examining the operational plans to strike around Guam, an American territory about 1,800 miles or so from North Korea. About 160,000 or so people living on that island, 2 U.S. military bases.
Chamorro ancestry starts in the south of Taiwan, with migrants going from there to the Philippines and then also into Indonesia in search of several different resources, one including jade, right, greenstone. And so our understanding is that our ancestors, for some reason or another, and the reason that was imminent in terms of having to leave, is that they boarded canoes and they headed straight into the wind and ended up here in Guam. So on one hand, if you read enough historical accounts and you read also studies on ceramics and also carbon dating bones and DNA, that's an understanding that we accept as truth. I mean, at this point, we act based on that kind of, that's part of it. The other part is our creation story of Fontan and Potna, relationship with the brother and sister, and that the brother dies and sacrifices his body to create the different elements in our ecological landscape. But it also is very important because it sets out a division, our first divisions, and that is between male and female, men having domain over the sea and women having domain over the land. And that is their not only domain, meaning that they are entrusted to care for and eventually become to symbolize those things, right, in the future.
When we look at the history of the Chamorro people across 3,500, almost 4,000 years in the Marianas, we don't have history books, we don't have oral history, we don't have stuff that tells us about everything in those 4,000 years, but there's certain things that we can use. And one of the main things that we can use to understand their lives across hundreds of generations is pottery.
What we see in ceramics is changes over time, right? So very early on, you have smaller pottery that kind of shaped outward, and they were more designed, more motifs that were sort of carved and infused with offuk or lime. And this is what's called the sort of pre-Lacti Mariana's red pottery. And then over time, pottery got bigger and started to kind of form straightforward, right? So it started off smaller like this, and then over time, it just got bigger and bigger until it kind of curved inward.
Through archaeological digs, through collections, we can see the pottery that they made and that they used in their daily lives for all of those millennia. It can't tell us everything, but it can provide a sketch, an outline of what Chamorro life was like. The earliest pottery, Marianas red is what they call it, reflects new arrivals in the Marianas. They're navigators, seafarers who have come across the great ocean, the first people to settle in the Pacific.
There we study how our people migrated through written literature or whatever else. We can tell you that the only way they were able to get here is on this canoe. And we can spend hours and weeks and months and years talking about this canoe and how this canoe is made. I like to call them like people who was not only brave, maybe in some ways they're a bit crazy people, you know? Can you imagine crossing so many miles of unknown? That's something that I don't know if people can just do it today. You can see that this canoe is not made up of one single piece. Certain things were critical components of why the voyage was able to be made, right? The only way that it was possible for us our ancestors, to make it here was on something like this. And maybe even more than this canoe, that ocean out there, that's our link. That's our highway. That's our lifeblood, Without that, nothing would ever have been possible for us.
Seafarers, the first people to settle in the Pacific, there's not a lot of room in their ships. And they're moving from island to island. They're finding new homes. So all of their pots are small. And they come from traditions in Southeast Asia where the Lapita peoples, where they make beautiful, finely intricate pottery. And so that's why we see the earliest pots are small and mobile, and they have these beautiful designs in them. But time passes, and after Chamorros have been here for about 1,000 years, the pots start to get bigger, and they start to get less and less intricate. There's still designs on them, but they're less common. So people have moved away because what you see is that they have developed their own distinct identity here as a people. And then, and so they're not making the same pots that their ancestors did who migrated here, because now they've got their roots. They've settled into villages, and they've been in those villages now for 1,000 years. They have their own identities. And so one thing that you see is that the pots go from being round like this to getting a little bit flatter. And that's a sign that a pot stays. A pot doesn't move with you, a pot stays. When we get to the Lati period, which is like 1,000 years ago, 1,300 years ago, that's when there's a big boom in population. And some argue that even there was an influx, that a new wave of migrants coming from Southeast Asia settled in the Marianas, because we see that Chamorros start to live in new architecture. This is when the Lati is introduced, so this is why they call it the Lati period. And we also see that Chamorros become the first people in the Pacific to grow and eat rice, because they start to grow rice, and we know this because we see it in the language. The Chamorro language has words for rice prior to colonization, but we also see it in the pottery. There's impressions of rice grains in pots, in pot sherds that have been found. But the pottery at that time, the Lati period, shows the population boom, and its spread shows the strain that this is happening on the population. That now you find pottery in all of these places that Chamorros didn't live before, because now there's more people, so people are moving into new areas that they didn't live in before because there's competition for resources. We find now that the pots are bigger, the walls are thicker, and they're even less intricately designed. There's still some, but there's less designs, less decorations, because now people have bigger families, people are feeding more, and they have to be used for longer periods.
Some pottery they believe might be tied to ceremonies. You also find pottery in burial practices. You'll find like skull in pottery, or the remains of a child or a baby in pottery. There's been one burial that was found in Saipan where a woman was buried with a large pot with a child in it, and then the child was placed on her abdomen area. So pottery had all these different purposes, I mean, from the very practical to the very ceremonial and sacred.
the artifacts we have here at Letexan are the lusong and the lomot, the mortar and pestle near the caves. Also the pictographs in the caves. There's laddie stones here. There's pottery shards. So those are all the different things that people can see here. And what it tells us is that I always consider it living heritage of our people. It's one way for Chamorros that are still that are living here on Guam or visiting Guam. That's a direct connection to their ancestors and their Chamorro heritage, and it brings it to life more so than reading it in a book as an ancient people that used to exist. So when we see these artifacts in real time and here at the refuge, they're parts of the story of our heritage and way for a really important way for us to connect to our ancestors and our Chamorro heritage.
Place like Ritidian or Letexan, that's one of the oldest villages on Guam, because when you look at it, there's so much fresh water there. It's got great access to the ocean too. And so you get the best of both worlds that you need to thrive. You've got fresh water to drink, you've got plenty of fresh water for crops, but you've also got great access to the ocean for canoes, for fishing. It's just a perfect place. For the Chamorro people, we are the first people in the Pacific to be colonized by Europeans. We remain one of the last people in the Pacific awaiting decolonization. And so the ways that we have been impacted by colonization is fairly profound. Even when you look at how other Pacific peoples kind of navigate the world today, connect to their past, Chamorros are different, because our experiences of contact and colonization began in the 1500s and the 1600s. Many other Pacific Island cultures, they started to experience that in the 1700s, the 1800s. And so Chamorros lost a lot, were disconnected from a lot. When Chamorros in the 20th century have looked to the past and asked questions about where do we come from, who are we. They have seen, like Native Hawaiians or other Pacific Islanders who perform dances that go back hundreds of years in their people, or they have looked at navigators from islands like Puluwat and Satawal and Lamotrek who have seafaring traditions of celestial navigation that go back hundreds, if not thousands of years, things that Chamorros used to have. And Chamorros ask and say, how come we don't know these things anymore? What happened to us? Why? How did we lose these things? And, colonization. In these conversations and in these quests for identity and a connection to the past, Chamorros then turn to what can they find to connect with? What can they find as like a foundation to turn to in looking for that connection to the past? And there are certain things that endure. And so one of them is, of course, that there are things such as the lati. The lati, which was once the pillars upon which Chamorros for almost a millennia perhaps, built their homes. And that the lati may have been the pillars for homes at one point, but they are still found in the jungle. They are incorporated into our daily life, our t-shirts, our tattoos, our anything nowadays. They still persist as a symbol to represent our connection to our past today. The language, the Chamorro language, even though there is Spanish in how we use Chamorro today, it still is something that connects us back almost 4,000 years to the first people who traveled and settled these lands in the Marianas. And another thing that we can use is, of course, pottery. Is that when wanting to find something, that you can hold on to and connecting you, touch a piece of pottery. Go into the jungles, go to a lati site and then touch a piece of pottery. And then a Chamorro person in the past, it may have been 100 years ago, it may have been 1,000 years ago, but a Chamorro person made that, a Chamorro person used that. And perhaps colonization broke that pot. Perhaps colonization left that village, to be abandoned. But the connection is still there. And so
It really goes back to that connection, it's like a sort of, it feels like a deep sort of ancestral descendant kind of connection, like holding pottery, even when you hold like the rim of the pottery and things even that we find like in the jungle at places like Texan that you mentioned that you guys visited earlier, right? It's like when you hold that rim and then like thinking like, wow, our ancestors kind of touched that same place, like that. For me, it's really that sort of connection. And I was always interested in like the arts of Pacific people and of like the people of the Marianas. And although these pieces may not have been made with the intention of being art, like this is kind of like the material culture that we've got, and so that's why I've been so interested in just like these pieces, the materials as a sort of ancestral connection to the past.
I was meant to do this kind of work, and I find it incredibly fulfilling because I feel like it's something that even in a small effort, just to be able to open and support space, for this kind of thing to happen, which is what I think part of this is what we do, is it's just opening space for the opportunity for indigenous knowledge to thrive. So I think personally, that's, I don't know, I feel like it's kind of a natural organic part of my own evolution. Some people have, everybody has a different calling, right? But mine just happens to be a navigator.
I've always had questions in my own life about what it means to be Chamorro. I didn't grow up feeling particularly connected to my own culture. Ever since kind of connecting with my grandparents, learning the language, and realizing that this island that I was born on, this culture that I come from, that I used to think was small and unimportant and didn't really matter, that it's actually pretty cool. And that I want to tell others about it, and that especially those who have a connection to it, I want to help them understand their connection to it, and that I want them to know more about what it means to be Chamorro, know about what it means to have history in this place.
But others have called us like guardians, because we are kind of at this point where we're losing a lot of our access to land and those types of connections. So safekeeping, caring for these pieces for the future descendants and the next generations.
Hi, my name is Mariana Jack G, and shout out to Gangsta K and Mr. Dukes.
Driving round, windows down, warm breeze and a soulful sound. I got my mind made up about where I wanna be. Can't nobody take my heart from me. There is no place like home. Saying goodbye to how gone. And I'm proud of where I'm from. Yeah, there's no place like home. A palm tree sway both night and day. Paradise, it's the only way. I got my mind